Welcome back to the conference. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Alan Katz. I'm the Paris Bureau Chief for Bloomberg News, and we appreciate you being here for this conference, for this panel on technology and climate change. When talking about climate change, or as I said, in the case of this panel about technology and climate change, what we're often talking about in large respect is energy. And as the war in Ukraine has reminded us, particularly here in Europe, we are far from ending our reliance on fossil fuels for our energy needs. So, given that we're going to continue to need to use fossil fuels for decades to come, even as we go through the energy transition, how can we try to reduce the impact of that use on our environment, whether we're talking about oil, gas, or even coal? What are the technologies that companies represented on this panel have developed or are developing to try to meet this challenge? How well do they work? How can we measure their effectiveness? And perhaps most importantly, how scalable are they? The other big move, of course, is into non-CO2 producing energy. For most people, that means wind and solar power. But there's another source that's also come back into the news recently, again, particularly here in France, and that's nuclear power. The issue here in France has been the availability of existing nuclear power plants and whether it's going to be enough to keep us from plunging into the darkness in the middle of winter. But longer term, the question is whether the new technologies in nuclear power will make it another branch of the energy transition or will be a false dawn like the one I wrote about with Gen 3 plants 15 years ago. Finally, the question of technology and climate change isn't wholly restricted to energy, so we'd be remiss not to at least touch on issues such as the use of technology in reducing manufacturing emissions. So with us here to discuss these and related issues are, to my left, Vicky Holub, President and CEO of Occidental, a U.S. oil company that's aiming for net zero barrels by investing heavily in carbon capture technology. Arnaud Pieton, CEO of Technip Energies, which is split off from the old Technip and is an engineering services and technology company focused on the energy transition, including for liquefied natural gas projects. To his left is Biljana Kajtovic, Group Executive Vice President in charge of IT and Digital at NG, which I'm going to have to start with France because otherwise I'll start with Belgium, which operates France's main natural gas network, Belgian nuclear reactors, gas-fired power plants in various countries, and a growing portfolio of renewable resources worldwide. Next to her is Stefano Buono, CEO of Nucleo, a nuclear technology company working on the next generation of reactors that aim to be much more efficient and safer. And at the end of this group is François Candelon, CEO of BCG Henderson Institute, which is Boston Consulting Group's unit dedicated to exploring new insights from science, business, and technology. So thank you all for being with us. To start with, I'd like to ask each speaker to respond in just 2 to 3 minutes, and we'll go sort of down the row, to the following question. And I think there might be some pretty different answers actually among the 5 of them. And the question is this: do we need a significant step forward in technology in order to be able to combat climate change effectively while still supplying enough energy to the world? So, Vicky, if we can start with you.
Thank you for the question, and great to be here. I'll say that absolutely it's going to take tremendous differences and changes and innovations in new technologies. And I believe that one of the things that we need to do is ensure that we develop the technologies that will enable us, and I know maybe not everybody wants to hear this, but we have to develop technologies that will enable us to use oil and gas for more decades to come. And the reason I believe that is because I believe it's not the source of energy that's the problem. It's the emissions from that energy, whatever the source. And I believe we have and are developing today technologies that will enable us to use oil and gas in a way with unique new technologies, innovative technologies that will eliminate or at least offset the carbon footprint of the production of oil and gas and the use of its products. And I believe that's going to be incredibly necessary because a transition with the elimination of oil and gas means that it's going to cost us about $200 to $300 trillion, because if we eliminate oil and gas, we're not talking about just transportation, what fuels transportation. We're not talking about what just fuels electricity, the production of electricity, but we're also talking about a lot of products that could not otherwise be made. Some of those are medical products. Some of those are the things you use in your daily lives, your iPhones, the materials that make the cars that you drive, A lot of this furniture, these chairs, there's so many things that are made from oil and gas that the transition is a lot more complex than I think most people realize.
Thanks. Aldo?
I will I will echo your comments. Yes, so short answer is yes. We need a lot more investment and leapfrogging in new technologies in order to achieve what Vicky just described, and which was the heart of your, the core of your question. I will add to what Vicky just said, that there are already technologies that are existing that can be deployed at scale, and what truly matters is the scalability. If you think about new technologies and investment on new solutions that are great but are not scalable, they are not that interesting if you really want to have an impact for the world. And a lot of those technologies, some of them do exist and they can be scaled up today and should be used today. So we're not starting completely from scratch, and we're not from zero. Some of it, and I'll come back to that later, can be implemented at scale. And that to me is extremely important.
Okay, thank you. Biljana?
Pleasure to be here. Thank you. So short answer, yes. I think it's not only up to technology, but we need a lot of different forces working together to deal with climate change and to deal with the increased need for energy. So recently, I looked into some of the numbers, and in 1882, the world needed 9,000 terawatt hours of energy. Last year, it needed 20 times more, which doesn't sound that much, but it is a huge number. 20 times more, it's 180,000 terawatt hours. And the US Energy Information Administration predicts we will need it 50% more by 2050. So the world needs a lot of energy, and our energy needs are only going to grow. So in your question, there were two things. One was around the energy needs, and the other one was around the climate change. And of course, we can have philosophical debate about which one takes precedence, but I think the reality is we need to tackle both. We need to continue producing energy, and as Vicky said, a lot of that energy we rely on oil and gas today, but we do need to make a very quick turn because climate change is not waiting. We see around us very severe weather events, so we don't have that much time to wait. So we need quicker call to action. And I think if I think about technologies, I think we can think about 3 different timescales. So immediately or in the years to come, we need bridging technologies that are going to help us to use and to produce energy from the sources we have and that we are used to while growing renewables. So we need technologies now like carbon capture and storage, for instance, which is still rather expensive, but we need to work a lot more on that. And we need to make sure that we deal with the intermittency of renewables. And then grow renewables. And while growing renewables, we need to think about how do we store energy. So batteries, for instance, or hydro pump and storage become very, very relevant. And then in the longest term or longer term, somewhere above 2040, 2045, maybe we can dream about having a nuclear fusion that is going to give us all the energy we need. So last year there was a big breakthrough, or maybe not a breakthrough. Our colleague here with more knowledge of nuclear can explain. But maybe we will need additional technologies that we actually didn't think about, where science is going to help us to solve some of the problems.
Thank you. Stefano?
Well, sorry for the voice. I think we need technology, but we first need a completely different approach. Because there has been a lot of innovation that has been done. All of these renewable, or what you explained just now, are already available. But what is not understood is how to balance what we have already and what we will have in the future. So we need to program. And I think we don't have to make the errors of the past. We have been using energy without essentially only with the goal of having energy at low cost. Then we realized that we needed an energy that had no emission. But I think that if we program now the energy of the future, we have to consider, of course, the CO2, but we don't have to forget about the impact on the planet, because the impact is also made of mining, is also made of waste, of the quantities that we need to produce that energy. So there are a lot of parameters that we need, and we need to account to all of these parameters, not only the CO2, to program the balance that we need in the future.
Thank you. François?
Yes, and I think that it should not be, and to follow what you say, we need as well, every industry needs to change a bit its mindset. Instead of trying to be net neutral, it's not about offsetting CO2 emissions. It's really about reducing them. And if I take, for instance, the ICT industry at the moment in the US, 50% of the renewable offset assets are just made by the ICT industry. So I think every industry needs really to look at its lock-ins, behavioral, institutional, with infrastructure, and they might differ, but it's really important that each industry really looks at what they need to do to reduce that, because technologies, as was said by Antoine, are there. The question is about scalability.
Right. And coming back to that, and by the way, don't hesitate to jump in one after the other. You don't have to wait for me to call on you to speak, because we do want this to be as interactive as possible. But coming back to that question that both Arnaud and Biljana brought up, which is that we have technologies today that we can bring to bear. And so I guess one question for all of you is, what for you are the technologies that you think are the most useful, or that you've deployed and have been the most effective already, that are scalable in your view, and that you think could be used right now to try to, well, either reduce CO2 or, as Stefano put it in a broader context, reduce the impact of energy on the planet? I don't know who wants to start. I don't know.
Maybe that's very selfish, but I will start on the list. So let's get real, okay? And I'm going to take a very concrete example of what we're doing at Technip Energies in order to make an impact very quickly. Let's take an example of a waste-to-power plant for the city of Oslo, which really wants to decarbonize. So it's about carbon capture, and it's about benefiting from an environment for sequestration through Northern Lights in Northern Europe, in Norway in particular. So it's about early engagement. It's about pilot stage. So here's a technology. I deploy it, small scale. We test for 6, 7, 8 months. And then while doing so, we assess the performance of the technology, and we assess whether at scale it could be performing. And we concluded it can. And that the economic environment...
about that. Sorry, you concluded that yes.
It did. Absolutely. Yeah. And the economics worked as well, because we can't work like that and promote in isolation without considering the economical equation. It worked. We're now going at scale. So we got a full-blown contract for capturing 500,000 tons, which is 99% of the emission of this waste-to-power plant. 500,000 tons per annum. So the scale at 10 is 1 million tons per annum of CO2. Below that, we don't really, that's 500,000 tons, but that's 17% of the total emissions of the city of Oslo. Okay. So we have the technology, and it can be made economical, and that's a very concrete example. So it's only, I would say, one example, and there are many leapfrogs to be made and to be achieved in order to decarbonize at scale. But for waste to power, gas to power, GTL, there are many folds of the industry or the energy industry and the power generation which can be decarbonized for as long as also the infrastructure is around. It's one thing to decarbonize the emitter, you need to do something with that CO2. Right, and in this case, we are benefiting from the Northern Lights ecosystem, and it will be stored, liquefied and stored there. So that's a very concrete example. It's happening now on LNG infrastructure. Same story. Large plant in Qatar. We have embedded a carbon capture module into the most recent project for Qatar Energy in Qatar, the NFE project. It's 3 million tons per annum. That's about 30% less than the standard LNG infrastructure. So the LNG infrastructure of the past, if I may say. In the new designs, we're now embedding those solutions. So it's not the answer to everything, for sure, but we're talking large-scale contributions here.
And so that's carbon capture and sequestration.
Correct.
It's something that carbon capture is something that Occidental's been working on a lot too. In a podcast that you did with a colleague of mine last month, you mentioned that your goal is to do carbon capture, but then use the carbon rather than just sequester it. Do you find that more economical, or would be a better use than well, I guess not a better use, but is that an effective use that you could combine even with some of the projects that Alno is talking about, or does it only work in oil wells?
No, absolutely. I think there are various uses of CO2 today, and thankfully, there's a lot of passion around climate transition. And you might not expect passion about climate transition from the CEO of an oil and gas company, but I live on a small island, Galveston, south of Houston, and I see the impact of weather changes. I see the impact of stronger hurricanes than we've ever seen, more frequent hurricanes. So we have a passion around making this happen, and so we've committed to do it. What we believe is that, first of all, the two technologies that we believe will help us with our strategy, which is to continue managing carbon as we've done for the past 50 years, but to do it in a way that's more beneficial to the environment, while also helping to provide fuels that people can use that are lower emission. And so we're building two technologies. One is direct air capture, which takes CO2 out of the atmosphere. So this is a reduction of CO2 from the atmosphere. This has to happen. Even if you stopped all the emission from all the sites around the world that were emitting CO2 today, there's still 50% more CO2 in the atmosphere than in pre-industrial times. So we have to reduce that. So direct air capture is one way we're going to do that. And with respect to the use of the CO2, if you use CO2 in an enhanced oil recovery reservoir, it takes more CO2 injected into the reservoir than the incremental the oil that's produced will emit when used. So you actually come out with a net zero barrel of oil, which then can provide jet fuel and for aviation, maritime fuels. Those are important to be lower carbon than what they've been before. And net zero is what United recently teamed up with us to do, so they can have net zero aviation fuel for their fleet. They want to do it that way. The other thing that for us is that you can actually combine CO2 with hydrogen and other things to produce a much lower carbon intensity fuel. And so that's another way to use CO2. CO2 is being used now to make diamonds. CO2 is being used to make clothing. We believe ultimately CO2 is going to be making the products that we use to build our homes, the products that we use to build these desks. So with all the innovation happening in the world, we believe that being able to extract CO2 out of the atmosphere is going to have a lot of uses for the CO2, and that putting it in a brine reservoir is actually a waste of an important product.
I'll answer from a bit of a different perspective, from renewable perspective. So we have technologies that allow us to produce renewable energy, to produce green energy, but renewables are intermittent. So two very big parts of technology world that help us with that. The sun does not always shine, the wind does not always blow. So when you produce, you will have excesses and then you have lows. It's really important to actually have the right way to store the energy. So this is where not only batteries, but batteries as well are becoming extremely important. And we have, for instance, at the moment, lithium-ion batteries that are very important. But for instance, the hard storage batteries are becoming even more lucrative and even more important. And it's really important to invest in making sure that we have batteries that are safe, that we can produce with lower costs, so that we can shave the peaks of the troughs of renewables. But I'm also here representing IT and digital, and I think from digital perspective, it is a huge role that digital technologies can play in predicting, for example, with renewables, the availability of our assets, the production of the assets, in order to know what goes to the grid, and in order to be able to manage a rather complex energy system, where we're coming from rather stable sources of energy, that we're coming from fossil fuels, into the world where we have so many small suppliers and so many small users in a very, very complex system. So we need digital technology and data coming from all these different sources, from, for example, the solar panels on people's houses, from electric vehicles whose batteries are becoming storage units. we need to manage that in a very complex system through data and through, for instance, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and Internet of Things. And this is where digital technologies are also starting to play a very key role in actually managing the energy transition.
Yes, and I would like to add to that, because it's true, and we see it in Australia, for instance, when you have an energy mix where renewable is very high, there is so much volatility that what you said is very important. I really like what you said as well on the technologies that are not all green or full green. I like to call them khaki in a sense, because they're a bit green, but on something that is brown. And I think that if we want to have more impact in a short period of time, these technologies might be really part of the solution. So try not to go for full green maybe, but making sure that we apply khaki technologies to a large chunk of our emissions.
And can I ask one thing actually before you step in, but coming back to the carbon capture, one of the things that you said, Arnaud, that struck me is you said that that at least your Oslo project was economically viable. I guess from waste stream, carbon capture today is economically feasible. You could expand it to every city worldwide and it would be economically feasible. Is direct to air carbon capture economically feasible today, or are we not there yet in terms of the maturity of the technology to make it? I mean, because again, carbon capture has been around for quite some time. It's never taken off because of the cost. Have we solved that issue or not yet?
Well, me to answer this first, or
Me?
okay. I would say that we are at a place where wind and solar was 20 years ago. How long did it take us to improve the technology in wind and solar? And any of you making technology understand that there's a technology development curve that you have to follow when you're making the first of a kind of anything. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a Tesla car or if it's NASA building a new rocket. They don't want to send their rocket up until they're sure that it's going to make it back. But on technologies, you have to build it and you have to use it before you can make it better. And so what we've found from the work we've done on direct air capture with carbon engineering out of Canada is that we have a pilot plant, and we've been every component that's in this direct air capture is used in an industrial process somewhere today. So it's not completely new and different technology that we don't know will work. We know it will work. What we're trying to optimize now is how the pieces work together and how the pieces individually can be optimized. And what we're realizing is that even in industrial sources where these things are used, all components are used, sometimes they're in processes where people haven't actually, the users of those components haven't really stopped to think about how well they could be optimized if they just put a focus on it. So we're quite sure that over time, we're going to be able to not reduce probably by 80% as wind and solar did, because I don't know if any of you remember, I remember the days when people said, you can't build wind turbines. You can't build solar because it's not going to work. It's too expensive. Thankfully, the people building wind and solar ignored that, and they did it anyway. And now it's successful. And now it's a technology that we must have. Direct air capture is a technology that we must have too. So we're not approaching it with a concept that it's too expensive right now. We're approaching it to know with the commitment and the conviction that it has to work. So we're going to find a way to make it work. And based on what we've seen from our pilot plant, we have the confidence that this will be an economical way to do it. And it will also help to provide funds for the energy transition if we can use the CO2 to generate incremental oil that will then help others decarbonize. If we do it like that, it's going to be a huge help for the transition.
And Arnaud, in your Oslo project,
I mean, same, pretty much same story. It's about using and it's about scaling. The technology for capturing the CO2 on the Oslo project is a technology that actually was a sleeping technology at Shell. We liked it. We felt we can do something with it, and therefore we started understanding it and investing into it again. Funnily enough, about the khaki notion, this technology is actually derives from the refining industry. So it's about, kind of the same resources or, same brains, new solutions. We invested into it. It's now half the cost, half the size, actually 80% the efficiency, and there's still potential. So it sounds a bit cliche, but it's only in the span of 2 years, and it's beyond cliche. It's actually it's happening. So everything that Vicky stated and the need for scale and for using is immensely true. And you don't want to throw the baby and the bathwater together. There's a lot of good that needs to be retained that is in the existing technologies that are totally pertinent for solutions towards a post-pollution world or a net zero world.
And I forgot to say that when wind and solar when they were trying to optimize that technology, they were having to do a lot of trial and error with digital twin computing technology that we have today. It's going to make the process of optimizing and improving new technologies a lot faster.
Very true. I mean, the pilot in Celsio in Oslo was fully instrumented. We tracked it, we monitored it, so we're benefiting from and from now on the twin is built into the design of the thing. So it's actually I mean tremendously helpful for performance tracking and optimization and so forth.
And it's true that this notion of experience curve at BCG, we're extremely sensitive to it, but I think this experience curve on cost and is critical. And the more it is a way to move into this economic viability versus scaling and rolling out.
Stefano, I'd interrupted you earlier.
Well, I think we have an energy which has been also forgotten a little bit for sleeping, technology that has been sleeping since a long time, that is nuclear. It has been actually invented 80 years ago, and is 70 years that is commercial. But in the last 35 years, there has not been any innovation in the field of nuclear, especially in the Western world. So the current energy crisis is given the opportunity for nuclear to come back, and also, of course, the need for decarbonization. And I must say that there is even a further element that makes nuclear attractive today, which is the need for independent source of energy. And nuclear is an independent source of energy because when you start a nuclear reactor, you don't need to refuel it for tens of years. So it has become attractive again, and the price of energy today makes it also a little bit competitive. So I think what is good is that we have a lot of experience and we can design today a new method, a new way to do nuclear, which is more sustainable, which is very important. One innovation that has been in the past, in the 70s, the 80s, and has never been introduced is the use of fast reactors that opens the way to a different fuel cycle. Today, it is possible to make reactors that use the waste from the previous nuclear industry, so that essentially we don't need to mine any uranium anymore to produce massive quantity of energy. In France, only the waste that is accumulated here could give energy to France for the next 2,000 years. It's incredible. So by using a well-known technology, we can today achieve goals that are very important because we can use a decarbonized energy, which is dispatchable. So it's available day and night without any difference during the season. And this component is very important for the energy balance of our systems.
I just wanted to say, last week I visited the first nuclear plant I've been in, and I got a chance to see a reactor. It was a stopped reactor, therefore, but the feeling was just amazing, and people were explaining how much energy gets released, and it's totally mind blowing. And I was very happy to see extremely strict safety and security rules. It takes you about 2 hours to get there. From the entrance to the plant till you actually get to the reactor, as it should be. So as a citizen, I really felt reassured. But maybe just to bring something else in the discussion, we talk a lot about technologies related to supply. We also need to think about technology when it comes to demand, because one of the things we need to do is also all of us to reduce the demand, and technology can help significantly there, both in terms of, I don't know, how we build our houses and how we actually go about how we preserve the energy, but as well when it comes to, again, digital technologies that are helping us to to use energy in more optimal ways. And sometimes it can be literally as simple as ensuring that the light, that the heating is only on when people are present, where technologies that we already have, like Internet of Things, machine learning, can really help us. And that way we can make really good changes. And for us in Europe nowadays, it's really important. So we also have just applications that are helping our consumers to consume less by providing you data that can benchmark your household with similar households and give you specific examples to say, okay, this week you have turned on your machine so many times. What I've seen and with other households, they do it this way. So give you very practical examples to help you to actually reduce demand. And we already have technologies to do that. It's more just changing the mindset. And you mentioned the mindset before. It starts with change of mindset, change of behavior, because next to ensuring that we do better supply, we also need to do demand in a different way.
To come back to the production side for a minute, and in particular nuclear power, since you both were just discussing it, the real issue with the restart in the nuclear power industry, that when they tried it 15 years ago, was as you pointed out, it took you 2 hours to get, from the gate to the part of the reactor, all the safety measures, the tolerances are extremely tight. It turned out that building nuclear reactors in a safety-conscious world is extremely hard and extremely costly, right? Olkiluoto in Finland is still not fully online, and that was supposed to come online in 2008. Flamanville in France is still not online. These are too big. I mean, they're massive reactors. They're 1,600 megawatt reactors. They're huge, and they've turned out to be too complicated, too difficult to do efficiently. Do you really think the new generation of reactors that you're talking about, Stefano, will be able to overcome that particular problem, which is the affordability and the, not even affordability, the ability to do this in a relatively short time frame and actually build things effectively?
Yes, that's why we need some innovation in the field. The biggest, more visible innovation is going smaller and modular. This is very important because it's true that the very big plants that have been built have also suffered the period in which legislation has changed very much after Fukushima accident, that by the way didn't create any casualties for the nuclear accident, but increased a lot the safety measures of these plants. So you pass through a lot of safety, but this is guaranteeing a way to produce energy which is very safe. Really very safe. Nuclear energy is the only industry that is taking care in a very precise way of its own waste, for example, which is something very important for the sustainability of a business. So going modular, having the possibility of building the same small reactor in a modular way in a factory is part of the solution. And then using slightly different technologies, you can also achieve improvement. We have chosen a particular technology, which is the use of lead as a coolant that allows to burn the radioactive waste of the past, but also to make very compact machine. So we think we may build reactors that cost half of the cost of a normal PWR with the same energy produced. So this is a significant step in this cost issue.
So, as you pointed out, modular, and then I'll stop with my nuclear obsession. But making it modular is very important. I mean, it really is striking the kind of tolerances you need, not just for the nuclear portion of a reactor, but also for the civilian portion of the reactor. You think that in a factory setting, you can hit those tolerances essentially on schedule and on budget, and come back to essentially a situation like we had in the 1970s, where you can produce these reactors quickly, effectively, and get them online and providing energy in a reasonable way.
Absolutely. Think about the fact that in Italy, we used to build reactors. The first 3 reactors we built was in 3 years, 3 years and 4 years. It's incredible. So we can actually come back. If we have modularity, if we repeat the same project over and over, of course, we can build reactors in a very short period of time. And since the cost of reactor is really the fact that money is blocked for a long time, If you avoid this, then you have solved a very big part of the problem, because then you don't have to use fuel, so you have an initial cost, but it's amortized over a long period of time, so it becomes very cheap.
And if you add to that the serial effect, because you do many of them of course, I mean, we're back to this notion of experience curve, decreasing cost per unit over time.
I mean, to the importance of repeat and modularization. We always underestimate the benefit and how much we can yield from those two words. Repeat, design one, build money, and modularization. We built the LNG infrastructure in the Arctic Circle. You talk about tolerances, etc. It's probably not, the level of tolerances we need for the nuclear industry, but nonetheless, building modules in China, Southeast Asia, bringing them to the Arctic Circle and matching them together. There's a lot, temperature differences, this and that. So the same type of drivers, probably not exactly the same tolerances, but the notion and the know-how around modularization is tremendously important in order to yield the type of results that the industry and the energy industry needs to yield. So totally support Stefano's point on that matter.
I'll see. And one thing, so Bibiana, you brought up, I was going to save this for a later question, but I'll come back to it because you mentioned it, was the issue of batteries and the need to be able to store energy. Now, that's, of course, not true for nuclear reactors. It's not true for oil, but it is true for renewables. And so from your perspective, whether it's yours or anybody else's on the panels, how close or far are we from, again, batteries that are size efficient, cost efficient, that allow us to store energy well enough to make renewables useful enough to whether or not they're ever base power, but so that even when the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, they're still actually continuous contributors to the electric grid.
So maybe before I go into batteries, there are different ways to store energy. So already for decades, we have the hydro pumped storage units. So basically you have two lakes at different heights, and you pour water from one into another, and that way you either save energy or you produce energy. So it has been there for a very long time. It's a very good way to deal with and create flexibility in your electricity grid. Now, when it comes to volatility of renewables, intermittency, storage becomes extremely important. So it could be batteries, it could be these hydro pumped storage units, it could be hydrogen, but batteries are something that we are in power industry looking a lot into, and technology exists. So we have lithium-ion batteries that are used in cars, for instance, that is used in our electronic devices, etc. So they exist. The problem with them is cost. The other one is safety. So they have thermal runaways. So every once in a while, there is a fire that they caught. So we need to do a lot better on safety for the batteries. But as well, they lose capacity over time. So there's a lifespan. So there's a number of problems that are being worked at. So we need new innovation. There are plenty of companies that are working on this. It is one of the issues as well. Lithium. How do you find it? Where do you find it? What are the quantities that you will need once we actually start producing batteries on a lot higher scale and put it as a key part of the microgrids that are going to exist in this very complex energy system? So for sure, innovation is going to be the key.
I'm going to take a bit of an alternative route. And you mentioned hydrogen. I think I'm sitting here between a utility NG, electron, and Vicky, who's more about the molecule, hydrogen. All right. So as 10, we're going to bridge the two, if I may say, bridging the electron and the molecule. Why are we talking about hydrogen and derivatives? It's not for the sake of just hydrogen. It's about energy storage. It's about turning, benefiting from the sun where there's nobody, or desert, or somewhere in Australia, far away from the consumer, and taking advantage. What do I do with that? I turn it into a molecule. Turning the electron into a molecule, power to X, is about energy storage as well. I think batteries will be needed, but the molecule will be needed. And you go from electron to, say, CH4, which is gas, you ship that. And then you use the gas for what's needed. And it's clean gas. It's negative carbon gas. So think about the molecules as well as a way of storing. And it's time for the two worlds, for the utilities and I would say the so-called more traditional energy companies to oil and gas companies to bridge. And that is also a way of addressing energy storage.
Fully agree. Within ENGIE, we call it the green molecule. So it's a green molecule that you need where you cannot transport, so you cannot electrify everything because you don't have transport networks everywhere, but you need to transport energy, store it and transport to places where you don't have it. So at the moment, if you think about Europe, we need to bring with a lot of LNG boats, a lot of energy that we need now with the gas supplies being cut off. So in the future, we will need to think of different scenarios where we will surely, for a lot of time, need green molecule to help us.
And I would say that when you have this kind of discussion, this kind of panel, you could really envision the kind of discussion we're having could turn into collaboration. That collaboration could turn into a comprehensive way to address all the issues that we have, rather than some meetings that happen on an annual basis where people set targets, but they really don't map out how you get to where the world needs to be. And so I would offer that, as a part of making our chemicals, we have chemical plants that make the medical bags and the IV tubes that you use in the hospitals and other hospital equipment. And then we have some of the products we make in our chemicals business from the use of ethane from oil and gas is to make the PVC that provides fresh water to people around the world rather than lead pipes. And so there's a lot of good products, again, that comes from hydrocarbon gas, but another byproduct of that chemical process is hydrogen. And we generate hydrogen. We sell hydrogen today. But what we sell hydrogen at today is not the price that some people are building new plants to generate hydrogen sell it for. And so we've got to look at comprehensively where are there things being created as byproducts of things that could go into a bigger process and be used in a better way. And so that it really requires a lot of collaboration. And while I'm collaborating here, I would say that the power industry, there's another technology that we've invested in, and we didn't create the technology, but it's another group of smart people that have a passion around making this transition work. They've generated a process called net power, which combust hydrocarbon gases with oxygen instead of air. And what it does is eliminates all the volatile organic compounds, so no emissions there. And it captures CO2 as a part of the process because it's the CO2 that drives the turbine to create electricity. And then it captures a small stream of CO2 coming off of it that you can then convert to a product, whatever you want, whether you want diamonds, clothes, or you want to, like United, put it in the reservoir and generate zero carbon oil. So you could do a lot of things with that CO2. That's a technology for the power industry that Baker Hughes today is doing some modifications of the turbine on, and will be ready for construction starting in 2025.
Right. So, I mean, people have generally been pretty pro all sorts of different kinds of energies on this panel so far, and someone who may or may not be on the panel recently said to a colleague of mine, "Too many people are focusing on killing energy sources rather than killing emissions. The common enemy that we all have are emissions, and that's what we need to control." But I guess my question for does everyone on this panel actually agree that we can control emissions from oil, gas, and coal? Because don't forget, especially given the cutoff from Russia, that Europe in particular is burning a lot more coal than it used to. That we can control the emissions from those energies in the time frame that we need, because, as you've all mentioned, climate change is upon us, right? We need to do this in short order. Do you all agree that?
I agree with it.
I'm sure you do. But Arnaud, do you actually agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. Once again, let's take a concrete example of an LNG infrastructure. Easier done on a green field, of course, than on brown field, but nonetheless, our clients are investing into decarbonizing their LNG infrastructure, existing infrastructure, because it is very much about future-proofing your investment. As simple as that. If you don't take care of it, if you don't decarbonize it, you won't be able to sell the product no more. Okay, so LNG as a green field. We can decarbonize from the well, and we can decarbonize the liquefaction part. So at least from exiting the well to getting into a tanker, we can bring that one to zero emission, because we can capture the CO2 of the gas exiting the well. And when it comes to the liquefaction process through electrification, which is happening, and Vicky is contributing to that, as a company, you can actually power the infrastructure through solar and use green electricity, which is the case in Qatar, by the way. So you power the liquefaction process through green electrons. So from exiting the well to getting into a tanker, you can be emission-free. Then you need to take care of what's happening downstream from the liquefaction and the shipping. That's a bit more complicated in a sense that solutions don't truly exist yet. But maybe through CH4 or methanation, etc., there is a way. But so the whole chain is not totally taken care of. We haven't addressed it all, but there's a good part of the emissions that can be absolutely taken care of and eliminated, I would say, in the greenfield projects as we are doing it now. Absolutely available.
I might be an odd one in this panel, but I don't agree. And I don't agree because of the sense of urgency. I believe that we're missing the sense of urgency, not us in this panel, but us as a planet, because the world around us is changing and changing very, very fast. And we are debating still a lot about what we need to do, and we're putting the targets, and that is all really good. So there's no shortage of good intentions, but we are lacking sense of urgency that we need to quite quickly actually get to grips with, because a lot we can do. I fully agree. We have a lot of technologies, but the targets that we're still setting are quite ahead of us, while the world is changing probably a little bit faster than we even realize.
I would challenge that a little bit to say that what I understand what you're saying, and I can't say that what you're saying is not true, but from the perspective that I see, having been at COP27, what I see is people having a sense of urgency, but people that are in the room having the discussions about what we need to do have never, or people that are often have never been in charge of doing something massively on a large scale. Therefore, the project management around how to make it happen is not there. There's passion, there's urgency, but there's not a very valid plan around how to make it happen.
Fully agree. I think we're lacking capability to deal with such a complex problem, because this is not a problem of energy companies, of oil and gas companies. It's not a problem of fossil fuels. It's a problem that needs industries, that needs policymakers, that needs consumers to change very quickly under a very tight program management, and we're lacking those skills jointly, I think. Yeah.
I'd like to, and before handing over to you, Stefano, I'd like to say, and sorry for being sounding rude, I don't mean to be. I just want to add to be a little bit positive here. When I look at what our clients were asking us 4 years ago, where we basically had to pull to convince a client to adopt a low carbon solution because they were concerned about cost and whatnot. So they are still concerned about having the right economical, cost there. But in 100% of the time now, whether it's pre-concept studies, whether it's feasibility studies, or the real full-blown projects, they're asking for low-carbon solutions. Find us a low-carbon solution. What can it be? It's no longer maybe an option. No, it's, I want to know. Show me the way. And all sorts of customers are just, wanting and waiting to be showed the way. Again, at scale.
Let's go ahead.
I want also to be a little bit more positive. I'm an entrepreneur, so I have to be optimist. I think we are going in the right direction. There is some sense of urgency, and there is momentum which is building. For example, the financial community is pretty sensitive now to all of these elements in a very concrete way. But we don't have to fight each other. I mean, we will need so much electricity also to store chemical energy into hydrogen and so on, that we cannot leave behind any form of energy. So to come back to your question, I completely agree. We don't have to exclude and spend our time to say that one technology is better than the other. We really need technology, and we really need that innovation. That was your first question as well.
But I know, I don't know, because I fully agree with what you said, but I would say that, in my opinion, based on what I see, it's not evenly shared across the world. There are countries or regions, and for sure in Europe, we are more advanced on that. And when I look at the US, for instance, we have two fronts, and I'm not talking about the backlash that we've seen in some states, but I think it's important as well to bring more and more companies are, let's say, pushing for that. But when I'm in India, China is a bit different, because I see that there is a lot of pressure from, let's say, the opinions there to change that as well. So, but we still need to have something which is more global if we want to act at the right pace.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, transition means one and another thing depending where you sit around the world. And I was attending an event very recently, maybe were you there? It was about more energy, or maximum energy, minimum emission. It was not about minimum energy and minimum emission.
There's more the intensity than the overall the real number.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To carry on your point about downstream, you talked about the LNG cycle, and you said, through liquefaction, you can get to zero emissions, but downstream, it's a bit harder. In the preparation for this panel, Francois brought up a point of, we should talk a bit more broadly. And so if you go even further downstream, and I guess I'll ask Francois this question and others can jump in, what are there technologies that are both available and, again, at scale to reduce the climate impact or whether it's climate change or a broader climate impact of the end, not the end user, but the very downstream uses, in particular manufacturing, and can you accelerate their rollout?
But there are plenty of them. But I think it's a little bit like the discussion that we've just had. For instance, there is one company that I like a lot, which is Yara International, that is one of the largest fertilizer manufacturers, and they are using a new. They revisited the Haber-Bosch process, which is equivalent to several percentage points of CO2 emissions in the world. But now they are able to produce green ammonia from, let's say, green hydrogen, reducing by 80% the CO2 emission. And now it's at scale. So they are really having it both in, let's say, Norway, in Australia. But I think that all this discussion has been around, okay, how do we make it more economically viable? And this is, well, what Bill Gates says when he says we need an industrial revolution, because it's a new product architecture, more modularity, as you mentioned, or new materials, additive features, it's new processes. So it's a lot of investment. So the question is, when do we really start to have this? How do we stop this chicken and egg issue between economic viability and how we roll it out, these new technologies? But as we said, there are plenty of reasons why companies should enter into it. You mentioned that earlier on, which is the fact that if you look at for instance, the carbon border tax, I'm not sure it will be this type of thing that will happen, but at least there is this. If you are not embarking into it, your company will be much more resilient. Plus, you have the stakeholder, so the shareholders and the young talents. If you are not addressing that with your talents, basically you won't get them. And you have as well, I would say, from a consumer perspective, you have some, or customer perspective, you have some people willing to pay a premium for that. We've just issued let's say a study that is not about us. It's not a survey, because a survey everyone wants to do it, but really with real data, and we see that depending on the categories, between 5 and 15% of people are really willing to pay for a premium. And that's not huge, but it's much larger than just the new Hermes bag that is made of fungus. So
great. And so I guess your point is build it and they will come.
And we've seen that in solar, we've seen that in wind. So basically, in a decade, you divide by 80% the cost. So if we do it, it will happen. So it's how do we start it? It's the ignition.
And we can't not do it, right? Because if we don't do it, if we don't build nuclear, if we don't build direct air capture, if we don't push everything that we've talked about up here on this panel, if we don't push that, then we'll never cap global warming at not even 2 degrees.
Well, on that very optimistic note, unfortunately, we are running out of time. We could continue this panel for hours more, I'm sure. But I guess with the view of the apocalypse coming to you, we will end this and say thank you very much to our panelists for joining us. They actually were much more optimistic for most of the panel, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan.